The incident file was 14 pages. I had expected to close it in a SIL session. That was 6 months ago. The file is now 431 pages, and I have not closed it. My name is Sovith Kalran. I hold the rank of Assessor Prime at the Helian Institute of Xenophysiology, a position I have occupied for 32 years. My work is mapping thermal and radiation tolerances across catalogued species, establishing the threshold at which biological cognition degrades, then fails, then ceases. Until the afternoon I opened case incident VR7741, it was predictable work. Every species we have studied obeys the same curve. The body temperature climbs. At a certain differential above the species baseline, we express this in calorans, a unit of indexed thermal stress. Higher order cognitive functions begin to fragment. Language production degrades first, then spatial reasoning, then decision architecture. The body falls because the organ driving the body has already fallen. The curve is universal. Catalog entry confirmed across 61 species and 419 individual data sets. Humans appeared to follow the curve, their baseline, their degradation window, their collapse threshold, all of it within normal variance. What we had not yet done was watch a human cross the collapse threshold and then continue working. The review board convened the 14th day of the 8th cycle in the Helian Institute's sealed analysis on the 3rd sublevel. Board members, myself, senior researcher Vethan Oras, and medical observer Dalan Prius. The chamber is narrow, cool, and very quiet. Holographic display arrays run floor to ceiling along the north wall. Thermal sensor logs rendered as visual overlays. A moving map of a body's heat charted against time. Every cognitive function marker flagged in secondary color. The incident itself was simple on paper. A human researcher, one Callum Marsh, male, 41 years of age, attached to a joint survey team operating in a high-radiation stellar approach corridor, had experienced a thermal event during a close pass, instrument run. His suit's active cooling system had suffered a cascade failure. Protocol dictated immediate withdrawal to the survey vessel. Instead, Marsh had remained at his station for an additional 43 minutes, completing the instrument run. The initial review classification was occupational recklessness, possibly cognitive impairment, a failure of judgment driven by early heat exposure, resulting in the inability to recognize the danger. The board was there to confirm the mechanism and close the file. Vethan Oras asked me to begin with the thermal sensor log. I opened it. The first 30 minutes were unremarkable. Marsh's core temperature, as measured by his suit's internal medical array, tracked a steady climb consistent with the cooling failure. He hit his species' documented degradation onset point, 1.8 calorans above baseline, at the 19-minute mark. Protocol dictated withdrawal. He did not withdraw. I noted this, flagged the timestamp. At the 24-minute mark, he crossed 2.6 calorans above baseline. That is the threshold at which, in every human physiological study we had conducted prior to this incident, verbal communication becomes disorganized. Finding errors, syntactic fragmentation, the early dissolution of sequential thought. I played the voice log from that timestamp. Marsh's voice was unhurried, calm in the way that a room is calm before anyone has entered it. He was talking to himself, a habit, apparently, of lone instrument runs, annotating what he was doing as he did it. Thermal gradient on the second array is running about 3% high, compensating on the longitudinal register. A pause, the faint sound of manual adjustment. Better. Holding. Dalan Prius asked me to pause the playback. She leaned forward and looked at the temperature overlay. 26 minutes in. Marsh at 2.6 calorans. The degradation markers. Our system flags them in orange. We're registering as expected. The cognitive function estimate was showing a 42% impairment prediction, and Marsh had just manually compensated a 3% thermal gradient error on a precision instrument array. I let the log continue. At the 31-minute mark, Marsh crossed 3.4 calorans. That is what we call the disorientation threshold, confirmed across all human datasets in catalog, the point at which spatial reasoning becomes unreliable and self-assessment breaks down entirely. A human at 3.4 calorans above baseline in every prior record does not know they are impaired. The voice log, survey relays flagging a calibration drift in the aft sensor cluster. That's going to skew the thermal map if I don't catch it now. A longer pause. the sound of him moving carefully through the instrument bay. There. Secondary calibration running. Give it about 90 seconds. Ethan Oras made a sound, not words. The sound a researcher makes when the data does something the model said it could not. The secondary calibration, I confirmed this afterward, with our instrument system specialist, was correct. The aft sensor cluster had drifted. If Marsh had not caught and corrected it, the thermal map from that entire survey pass would have been unusable. He had identified an error at 3.4 kelvins above baseline, reasoned through the correction procedure, and executed it without error. I did not stop the log. I was no longer thinking about closing the file. At the 38-minute mark, 4.1 kelvins. This is the number I have written at the top of every report I have filed in 32 years. The universal collapse threshold, the point at which the data says the higher brain simply stops, not slows, not distorts, stops. 61 species, 419 datasets. At 4.1 kelvins above species baseline, the cognitive architecture that produces language, reasoning, and decision-making has, in every recorded case, ceased to function. I looked at Dahlin Prius. She was looking at the display. Marsh's voice, at the 38-minute mark. I'm getting a little warm in here. A beat. Something that might have been a quiet laugh. Not distressed. Not manic. Just the small sound of a man noting an inconvenient fact. Survey pass is 68% complete. Let's finish what we started. 68% complete. He knew the percentage. He was tracking completion state at 4.1 kelvins above baseline, at a radiation flux that our models had flagged as sufficient to degrade synaptic transmission on its own, independently of the thermal load. He was tracking it and making a decision. Continue. And the decision was not the irrational perseveration of a degraded mind. I reviewed his subsequent actions. Every instrument he touched in the next 11 minutes, he touched correctly. Every reading he logged accurately. Every system flag he caught, he addressed in sequence, in order of operational priority. At 4.1 kelvins, Callum Marsh was more organized than most researchers I have supervised at baseline temperature. I stopped the log. I looked at the board. Vithan Oras had not moved in approximately 4 minutes. Dahlin Prius was running the medical data again. Not because she doubted the sensors, but because there was nothing else to do with her hands. I told them I was going to play the final log entry. At the 43-minute mark. Peak thermal reading of 447 kelvins above baseline, the point at which he had, apparently, decided the survey run was sufficiently complete to warrant withdrawal. The point at which he had, apparently, decided to leave. His voice on the final entry was slightly slower than at the start. That is the only concession I can find in 43 minutes of audio, slightly slower, as if he were choosing each word with a care that earlier he had not needed. Survey relay complete. Archiving now. Cooling system is still down, so I'm going to need to move. Another pause. I could hear him beginning to move. Careful footsteps, deliberate. The sound of someone who knew exactly where every surface was, and was treating each step as a small, separate decision. Whoever reviews this log, the aft calibration drift I corrected at minute 31, will show up in the raw data as an anomaly. It isn't. Caught it in time. The thermal map is clean, he corrected the record at 447 kelvins. In the last minute of his time in that bay, with his core temperature, 47 hundredths of a unit, above the threshold at which we had documented the complete cessation of rational thought in every species we have ever studied. Callum Marsh corrected the record so that whoever came after him would not misread the data. I filed the review conclusion the following morning. Not occupational recklessness, not cognitive impairment. The recklessness classification requires that the subject was incapable of assessing risk. Marsh assessed the risk continuously and chose to accept it with full operational awareness. The impairment classification requires evidence of degraded function. I had 431 pages of evidence of the opposite. The board's final note was a single line, which I wrote myself. The thermal cognitive collapse threshold for the human species requires revision. Current mapping is not a measurement of their limit. It is a measurement of a point they simply choose to keep working past. Vethan Oras asked me, before we closed the session, what I planned to enter as the new threshold. I told him I didn't know yet, that we would need more data. What I did not tell him, what I have not written in any official document, 'cause it is not a technical finding, is that I am not certain the curve we have spent 32 years confirming has a human equivalent at all. The data says there is a threshold. The data also says Callum Marsh crossed it. Those two facts are both in the record now. I have placed them next to each other and let them sit. The next case file was waiting when I arrived the following morning. Teen tolerance study. I opened it. I have not since that session looked at a standard collapse threshold report quite the same way.